Alright, everything you just saw there was shot on an iPhone 11 Pro Max, using the native camera app in the ultra-wide lens, and no gimbal. I used this tabletop tripod from Manfrotto that can work as a hand grip too. So if you follow my channel, you know I did 20 short films in 20 days with a very similar approach to how I did this short film. This also plays into the B-roll challenge video I did. Basically, I'm keeping everything really simple, shooting in one location for about 30 minutes with just an iPhone, and then in this case, turning that into a short travel style film. The main idea behind this one really is using the ultra-wide lens in the native camera app and the built-in image stabilization. And so no manual control, but you can lock your settings. You'll see AE, AF lock at the top of the screen. That means your focus, white balance, and exposure are all locked. And overall, I thought the phone performed very well. But I did use post-stabilization to make it look its best. So here's the original footage with no color correction and no post-stabilization. So the first shot here I did post-stabilize, a little bouncy in the original. Same with this shot too, added some post-stabilization. But then you get shots like this that are stabilized right out of the camera, no post-stabilization, and they look great. That shot I did post-stabilize. But all this stuff is pretty impressive. And I love these tilts here, it almost looks like you're on a tripod. Now this sequence here was all stabilized in post-production. This was the most troublesome shot of the bunch. But then this wide shot is handheld and it looks like you're on a tripod. These shots are all right out of the camera here, no post-stabilization, looking really good. Another remarkably smooth tilt, might even be smoother than being on a tripod. I post-stabilized the beginning of this shot, it was a little bit bouncy. But then this is right out of the camera and incredibly smooth, looks like a gimbal shot. And these shots too. The built-in stabilization, especially using the ultra-wide lens, is really good. Okay, now let's look at that one shot that I had the most trouble with. This is the original, and it's really bouncy, so I took this into Adobe Premiere Pro and used Warp Stabilizer to smooth it out. Alright, so now we're in Premiere Pro, and the first thing I did was add the Warp Stabilizer effect. You drop that on and it starts analyzing the clip. I typically will lower that down to 25%, and then I'll adjust that later depending on what it needs. So this has been sped up about 1000% as this took several minutes to analyze. And by the way, you could do this in DaVinci Resolve or Final Cut Pro, or if you're on an iPad, you could use Emulsio. There's a variety of different ways to stabilize footage. All right, so that's done, and you can see once the stabilization is applied, it zooms in. So now let's see how that works. This is using Subspace Warp. And that looks pretty good, but you can definitely refine that to taste. And so I've sped up this section too, but I went through and checked out the different settings, position, scale, and rotation. And then I raised the smoothness up to 50%. And then I tried perspective. And so I think perspective looks pretty good. And just to demonstrate, here is the stabilization on and off. On and off. And now here's the original clip one more time. It's pretty bumpy, it swims quite a bit. And I've actually found that shooting straight on like this, I don't get the best results using the in-camera stabilization. And now here that is post-stabilized out of Premiere Pro using Warp Stabilizer. And that looks pretty good. It is very interesting though, because side-to-side motion I'm finding is really smooth right out of the camera. It doesn't really need any post-stabilization. The shot looks really good as is. I'm walking backward and to the side, kind of at an angle, and it holds up really well. And on this shot too. And these are the same things I found in the video I did recently comparing the native camera app to FiLMiC Pro. If you haven't seen that, go check that out after this video. I'll put a card right here. But here's an angled shot from that video going more or less side to side, looks good. And here's walking straight forward. Again, this is handheld, so it doesn't look bad. It just doesn't look as steady as a gimbal might. So this shot you would want to post-stabilize. So now here's a side-by-side comparison. The original versus the graded with some post-stabilization. And I've indicated the shots that are post-stabilized. And for the most part, the stabilization I did in post-production is pretty subtle. The built-in stabilization did a pretty good job overall. This sequence here was really the bounciest, the shakiest. But with some post-production work, it looks pretty good. And by the way, if you're wondering, I did the gray, black, and white just for a stylized reason. I wasn't trying to hide any imperfections or any weird colors. I just thought the black and white looked pretty cool and I went with it. Really impressed with these shots here. Hard to believe that's all handheld. So the iPhone 11 with its ultra-wide lens and the built-in image stabilization using the native camera app, it's really a pretty good combination, I have to say. But depending on what you're doing, it is definitely limited. Not having manual control or the ability to shoot in higher bit rates is kind of a bummer for a lot of the stuff I do. So for those kind of things, I would definitely stick to a third-party app like FiLMiC Pro or the Moment Pro camera app or Mavis, whatever you prefer. But it is really nice sometimes just to get the technology and the gear out of the way and go shoot something, go create something. So here is the finished piece one last time, but with an alternate grade and in color. Thanks for watching, guys. This is Blake Calhoun. Please like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.